Imagine living in a world where a simple, faint beep, beep, beep coming from the sky could strike absolute fear into the hearts of an entire nation. Just think about that for a second. Looking up at the stars and realizing that the sky wasn't just a limit anymore. No, it was the new frontline. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a really thrilling look at a time when science, global politics, and just sheer human ambition collided, and the heavens above us literally became a battlefield. It's kind of terrifying to think about, isn't it? What if space was actually a battlefield? Well, the crazy thing is, for a huge chunk of the 20th century, it essentially was. We had these two massive global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, and they were locked in an incredibly high-stakes race. But here's the kicker. They weren't fighting for land or, natural resources down here on Earth. They were fighting to control the future. They were racing to see who would absolutely dominate the stars themselves. Section 1. The Silent Battlefield. Roots of a Celestial Rivalry. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the space race, we have to look at the ashes of World War II. After the dust settled, two massive superpowers emerged. And at first, they were allies, but that relationship extremely quickly morphed into this deep, intense distrust, and that gave birth to the Cold War. Now, this was a silent war of ideology, so there were no direct military battles between the two, but rather a constant, grinding competition defined by intense political maneuvering and a desperate, completely all-consuming race for technological supremacy. You see, both sides desperately wanted to prove that their specific way of life was just fundamentally superior. On one side, you had the USA championing capitalism and democracy. On the other, the USSR pushing communism. And the ultimate tool they found to prove who was the absolute best wasn't initially a spaceship at all. Actually, it was rocket technology. And ironically enough, the future of space exploration was literally built on captured weapons of war. During World War II, Nazi Germany had developed these highly advanced rockets, specifically the V-2. So when the war ended, both the USA and the USSR completely scrambled to capture these brilliant German scientists. The US managed to secure a key figure named Wernher von Braun, and he would go on to become the absolute backbone of the American space program. The board was officially set. Section 2. USSR strikes first. The Sputnik shock. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how aggressive the start of this race really was. Honestly, no one in America was prepared for what happened next. In a shockingly rapid succession of milestones, starting on October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union absolutely stunned the world by launching Sputnik 1, the very first artificial satellite. As it orbited the Earth, it sent down that simple beep-beep signal we talked about earlier, and that sound literally terrified Americans. Why? Because if the USSR could put a satellite in orbit, well, it meant they had the rocket power to drop nuclear weapons across continents. Boom, the Sputnik crisis. Just weeks later, they launched Sputnik 2, carrying a stray dog named Laika. Then, in April 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the very first human to actually travel into space. The USSR was celebrating, and the rest of the world was just completely floored. Section 3. America answers the call. NASA and the ultimate challenge. Reeling from falling so far behind, the stunned United States responded by creating NASA in 1958. But they knew they needed a target so incredibly ambitious it would completely rewrite the rules of the game. So, just weeks after Yuri Gagarin's flight, President John F. Kennedy stood before the American nation and made this bold, historic declaration. He looked at the country and said, "We choose to go to the moon before this decade ends." This wasn't just a fun scientific goal, right? It was a direct line-in-the-sand challenge to the Soviet Union. NASA immediately launched the wildly ambitious Apollo program, and the next phase of the race was officially ignited. So the 1960s turned into this intense, neck-and-neck middle phase where both sides were just relentlessly pushing the absolute limits of human endurance to achieve these breathtaking breakthroughs. The U.S. answered back fast with Alan Shepard becoming the first American in space, quickly followed by John Glenn, who was the first American to actually orbit the Earth. And then the U.S. Gemini mission started mastering these incredibly complex maneuvers, things like spacewalks and docking ships together in orbit. But the USSR, they didn't blink. They kept pushing hard, sending Valentina Tereshkova up as the first woman in space and Alexei Leonov, who pulled off the very first spacewalk in human history. The competition was furious, and the pace was just off the charts. But we do need to pause here for a second, because we have to remember the incredibly sobering reality of this rivalry. Pushing the absolute limits of human capability at breakneck speed came with an unimaginable amount of danger. In 1967, disaster struck the American program. During what was supposed to be just a routine test on the launch pad, a fire suddenly broke out inside the sealed Apollo 1 command module. Tragically, 3 incredibly brave astronauts lost their lives. It was a devastating, heartbreaking blow that shook NASA to its absolute core. But out of that terrible tragedy came sweeping, vital safety improvements that ultimately made the rest of the journey even possible.
Section 4. The Lunar Climax. Reaching the Impossible.
I want you to literally burn this date into your memory, July 20, 1969. All the years of failure, the testing, the sweat, the intense effort, it all culminated right here. 4 days earlier, Apollo 11 launched toward the moon, carrying the weight of an entire nation's promise. And on this specific day, the entire planet held its collective breath in agonizing suspense as astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin piloted their small craft down toward the lunar surface.
And then the moment finally arrived. Neil Armstrong stepped off the ladder, his boots crunched into the lunar dust, and he delivered those incredibly iconic words. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. With those words, the United States achieved what once seemed completely, utterly impossible. They had answered Kennedy's challenge. And because the Soviet Union never successfully managed to send a human crew to the moon, right there, in that exact moment, the space race had a clear, definitive winner. Section 5. A Lasting Global Legacy. The Space Race's Gifts.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the story definitely doesn't end with a flag planted on the moon. This extreme ideological battle actually drove some of the most incredible innovation in the entire history of our species. I mean, the rapid advancements completely revolutionized the modern world as we know it. From the Apollo and Vostok programs, we got the satellites that literally power our GPS, our weather forecasting, and global communications. The need to calculate these insane orbital trajectories led to massive leaps in advanced computing. We gained profound medical and engineering breakthroughs. And maybe most importantly, it sparked a huge global interest in STEM fields, inspiring entire generations of kids to become scientists and engineers. Which brings us to where we are today. We can look back and clearly see that in the past, space was a battlefield. It was entirely driven by ideology, pride, and Cold War superiority. Every single launch, every orbit was a prestige-driven competition. But today, the paradigm has totally shifted. Space is no longer a theater for war. Instead, it's become a place for global cooperation, where nations actually work together, side by side, on things like the International Space Station, in the collaborative pursuit of science and the betterment of humanity. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. We've seen what humans can achieve under the immense, crushing pressure of rivalry. We've seen how the terrifying beep of a small metal sphere pushed humanity to literally leave footprints on another world. So as we look back up at the night sky, which is no longer a battlefield, but this amazing canvas of dreams and destiny, we have to ask ourselves, as we set our sights on Mars and eventually beyond, how will competition, ambition, and our relentless drive shape humanity's next giant leap? Think about that the next time you look at the stars.